Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine. All right.
Perfect.
Thank you. Third podcast in a row, back to the old location, back in the garage. Mags, thank you for joining us today as well. So today we're going to chat through a little compliance challenge that we did as coaches. And I think this has kind of been an underlying theme for the last few weeks, is talking about the difference between tracking macros and the difference between obsessive compulsive tracking of the macros. So I would argue that the two are very, very different things. And this month, what we've done as coaches, which is something that we do from time to time, I guess, the three of us often compete in weight class-based sport, is sometimes just tracking to see where things are at isn't enough. And sometimes you do need to take things to that kind of extra level of detail when it comes to your tracking. And Mags, if you want to give us a little insight as to why we decided that this was going to be a good month to do it.
Yeah. So about, it must have been like 16 weeks out of a competition that is happening next week. I spontaneously decided that I wanted to get back into competing in powerlifting. So I set out and started training for that. And I also realized that I was sitting well within well between two weight classes. And I knew that I could benefit from getting down to the lower one, that I was kind of stuck in between. And I also wanted a personal challenge. Obviously training was a challenge, or is a challenge in and of itself. But I personally wanted to add on that extra layer from the nutrition side as well, and kind of give myself a multitude of goals. So I have been working my way down into the 69 kilo weight class for my powerlifting competition coming up. So it was really important from that aspect for me to really be compliant and be actually compliant, because it had been a while since I had kind of tested my diligence, tested my compliance as it did relate to nutrition, with everything that has gone on in the past couple of years. So it was a really exciting goal for me. And I was really excited to have Ben and Kat kind of come on and support me and kind of challenge me in a sense, kind of that extra layer of accountability. Happy to say 1 week out from comp and we're at weight.
Beautiful.
I think it's probably important to acknowledge in there too that, like you said, with everything that's gone on in the last year and a half, tracking, and especially with a high level of attention to detail, has not been the priority for you, because that wasn't a tool that has been serving you well over the last couple of years. And that doesn't necessarily mean that nutrition wasn't a priority and that we weren't doing goal-centered and oriented things around that, but that tracking just wasn't what was needed or what was helpful to you at the time. And we've kind of come into a season in your life where it is helpful and it is being needed and it has been beneficial and not detrimental, right? So like we talked about a couple of podcasts ago, it's a tool, and when it's used in the right moments, it's fantastic, right?
I think it's sorry, Max, you go.
Just quickly to add on to that, it's been enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think finding those times, those moments, those seasons where tracking is enjoyable and it is fitting within your lifestyle makes a world of a difference as well. I've enjoyed this.
Positivity to your life, not negativity.
Yeah, exactly.
I think as coaches, often really the thing that separates us from our clients is just knowing what levers to pull, because it's something that we've been doing for a long time now, that what profiles work well for you, or where you need to tighten up things a little bit. And the reason we know that is because you've had a level of diligence, whether or not it's always been applied, but you've been kind of working off for the last 3, 4, 5, 10 years, right?
Yeah.
I know for us, when Mag said that she was going to, have to do a weight cut and wanted a little bit of accountability, we both jumped at the opportunity, more so because it was a good way to shake off a little bit of the lockdown dust. We'd been in a situation where we'd been pretty steadily locked down with no real access to the community. Obviously, we've got the gym here, but and as I said before, I'm someone who tracks and logs every day, but that doesn't mean that I'm always right on the money when it comes to the actual hitting of the targets. And sometimes you track and you get to a point and then it's like, oh, mum's baked like whatever cookies for Matea, or she's decided that the connoisseur ice cream is going to become a staple on like 3 nights or becomes 4 nights, and slowly you get to a point where you're like, I'm jumping on the scales and I'm seeing more 93s than 91s where I normally sit. And it's not something that happens overnight, but it's something that you start to see slowly over time. And it is nice, like you said, Max, to be able to flick that switch, set it up as a bit of a personal challenge as much as a bit of a challenge between the three of us. But it never ceases to amaze me how quickly you can feel and notice a change once you actually do start to tighten up and be a little bit more aware of those like extra little snacks that don't always make their way into something like MFP or onto the scale.
Well, I think not more than, but in addition to, say, like your example of jumping on the scales and seeing these higher weights that you don't typically see, it is also like the accumulation of bad habits that's occurring, right? And I know for myself, 3 very different situations going into this. My weight has been stable, like within 100 grams for months. So I've never seen a change on the scales, but I'd been accumulating these bad habits, these extra items, these goodies, things like that. And I've been struggling with postpartum hypothyroid, and I've just been experiencing more and more and more of the fatigue that I was experiencing right at the beginning, whilst knowing that my thyroid's actually within range. And it was like, okay, well, maybe if we clean up some of those habits, we get closer, we get that protein intake back up, we get the water intake, we get more of the veggies and all of those good things, maybe I'll start to turn the tide and start to feel a little bit better again, right? Which inevitably happens. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's times when it's really appropriate to tighten things up, and there can be a variety of reasons to do that.
I think it demonstrates too just the power of accountability. And I think that, there's a lot of people out there that feel like they have a good handle on their nutrition, or they understand nutrition, which the 3 of us do quite well. But still, when you're not accountable to anyone else, it's a little bit like I really want to eat that peanut butter. Oh, I've got to change my profile and put my fats up anyway. Or whatever it is, you kind of find those small ways to sort of justify in the moment. And those moments over 6 lockdowns and 12 months tend to add up. And you do find yourself in a position that's like, okay, I'm at that point where a little bit of regimented approach, of discipline, self-discipline, of staying accountable, and of, a little bit of sacrifice is not a bad thing. And it's also a nice reminder to know that when there's times of the year that you are a little bit less on top of it, or you're happy to let it go away because you possess that ability to snap, dial it back in, get back on track, and get back to it, right? Yeah. So I know that for Mags, obviously, you probably had the biggest motivators of all of having to weigh in specifically for a weight class. I know for me, rather than looking at it as more of a caloric restriction approach, I actually tried to take more of an increase in activity approach to create the same deficit. So rather than eat less, started running a little bit more, started focusing on a little bit more of that aerobic capacity work in order to facilitate the same deficit or the necessary deficit. So it definitely is more than one way to skin the cat, right?
And I think it was the complete opposite, where we started the compliance challenge, and it was like, you're 40 grams short on your carbs. Yeah. Right? Figure it out. And so for me, it was shifting the attitude from close enough is good enough to hit profile, not under, not over, hit it.
Yeah. I think too, the accountability is one piece, but also just taking the time to sit down, the 3 of us, be like, okay, what are our goals, right? We all just kind of explained what those are, but to be able to vocalize those and kind of refine that why, I think that's something that I know I have, and a lot of other people have kind of lost throughout the past couple of years of lockdown, is okay, yeah, I could hit my profile today, but why, so being able to sit down and kind of talk that out and vocalize what that why is, I think was really important. And really helped in terms of
It's
keeping
tough
us accountable.
to stick to a program if you don't know why you're doing it,
Yeah.
or you don't
Yeah.
care about why you're doing it, right?
We actually have an upcoming episode, surprise, on really the things that you need to take into consideration when doing any kind of fat loss or weight loss kind of phase, and you know, having a big enough why that's big enough than wanting to eat whatever's kind of left over in the fridge, or like, that's a really important part of it, because ultimately you're putting yourself into a level in some way of deprivation, right? Like if we're trying to signal weight loss or fat loss, you're going to have to do a little bit more depriving than you've been doing, because you're trying to stimulate change. And if nothing changes, nothing changes. So if you're kind of thinking, you know, about setting yourself a goal or a challenge to lose an arbitrary amount of weight, 5 kilos, 10 kilos, whatever it is, but you're just kind of doing that just because, I'm not really sure why, or it's not a specific purpose, it gets pretty hard to maintain. And then the harder it is to maintain, the less likely you are to start to see those results, the more disheartened you get. And that's kind of how we sort of trundle and fall sort of off the wagon. I think the other thing to be very clear on here is, you know, we are not saying we're just going to hammer a 4-week challenge and then blow right back like the other side. Like for us, this 4-week compliance challenge has been a way of resetting those skills and that diligence and that attention to detail in order to set some new benchmarks and minimum standards for the next 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, however long it may be.
Well,
Right.
it's developing and going into it with a plan, right? Just like we would never take our clients into a period of caloric restriction without a plan and just say, yeah, we'll just run this forever, right? You're going to do it for a set period of time until you reach your set goals, and then you're going to have a structured plan on the other side, right? And so I think for us, this was kind of the first step of it. Get those habits back, get it back in that good position, and then we're actually clear on what the focus is moving forward as well.
Yeah, I think that it is a little bit like you guys were saying before, you know, for Kat, you're actually finding you had to make yourself eat more than you would typically eat, because that is the goal with the profile, right? Like you're setting the profile to set the profile for a specific reason. So, you know, it's kind of more like a speed limit than a ceiling. You know, if you're driving on the freeway and the person in front of you is doing 120, that's not great. But if they're doing 80 in a 100 zone, that's also not the goal. Like the goal is not to fall short or go over, it's to get quite close. And in order to facilitate some extra incentives, we sort of set up a little bit of a point system where for each gram of your macros that you were off, your allocated points, and then the amount of points that you had kind of at the end of the month would dictate who sort of won this challenge. Now, if anyone out there has spent some time trying to diligently get MFP to the gram, it is the biggest pain in the ass. Like you end up having like a half a strawberry, 3 cashew nuts, and like a sniff of fucking whey protein isolate to just like try to get those numbers as close to zero. And again, short term, like that is something that you're probably more happy to bear for 4 weeks, but day to day, long term, like it's the juice is not worth the squeeze. And if you're consistently falling 40 grams of carbs short of your profile, then there's a bigger conversation there that probably needs to be, we either need to amend the profile because it's not appropriate, not achievable, or not practical, or like, what is the actual goal here and why aren't we meeting?
Or we need to do some planning around pre-planning meals and how to achieve that and whatnot. But I think, like you said, there's a very big difference between being 40 grams off something and like having the half a strawberry and the cashew. That is not a good long-term strategy. And that is where tracking becomes problematic for a lot of people over a long period of time. So when we take this and we say, right, this is the plan that we're going to do for 4 weeks, and then we've got another plan coming out of that, that's one thing. But it's certainly not a lifestyle that I would advocate for everyone as a long-term approach to their nutrition.
Yeah.
On so much satisfaction out of getting the numbers to the gram.
I think
Zero.
I think looking at kind of the ongoing scorecard, I think we were probably 2 weeks in, and we were coming up to like a family lunch because it was the first weekend in 8 weeks we'd been able to gather with a family. And I think by that point, Mags was like
On 2 points.
already like 10 points ahead. And it was just like, I'm just gonna have to like give her the win. But there was enough of going into those situations with those family events being like, I can pretty decently guess what I'm doing here. I know the parameters of what my plate should look like. I'm gonna opt for more of those like protein options, and I'm probably not gonna indulge with dessert today because I really am trying to dial it in for this particular length of time, right? The other thing that can be super useful, obviously, when doing something like a weight loss or a fat loss phase or a cut, is to have someone like a coach or an accountability buddy that like you're sharing that experience with. So I think we're quite lucky in that very rarely will you and I both want to indulge in either the same thing or the same time. Like it's pretty rare on like a Friday night where Kat's like, oh, could you do ramen or could you go pizza? And it's like, no, I think I'm just going to kind of stick with what we've got prepped. Very rarely will we ever both want to go and do that. And so you kind of have that support where,
so good, but so annoying.
yeah, it's you don't feel like you're missing out so much as you feel like, hey, we're in this together, and like it kind of take a win from that too. You know, when you get through the meal, that's the thing. Those momentary decisions are really purely just in that moment. And as you kind of practice in you know being disciplined and keeping that longer term goal, and I guess 4 weeks is not necessarily longer term, but longer than right in front of you of that desire or want to indulge or overdo it. Once that moment passes, there is that feeling of like, yeah, like my longer term goal is actually important to me, and I can actually have I do possess the ability to put that as a priority ahead of what I want in the immediate. Right.
I think for me too, like going into this prep, like kind of before we started this compliance challenge, there's a lot of other goals or focuses that I set for myself, which really just set me up for a lot of success with this compliance challenge. Things like not drinking, not eating out or very limited eating out, and making a lot more time for myself, which really helped support those first two goals. I obviously really took advantage of those goals, and it really helped me in terms of the compliance, like being able to hit those macros. It was like a yes, like it was really making it all like worth it in a way. But I think, you know, just setting myself up with those kind of external goals with more to it than just, okay, I want to be perfect with my nutrition or I want to lose weight, right? I was working towards this much bigger goal, which is this competition, and not drinking alcohol and not eating out and spending more, you know, nights in and working on self-care and all that sort of thing was supporting my training as well, right? But the physical, the mental aspect of training too. So it was all just kind of like this package that ended up coming together, and the nutrition piece honestly became just second nature to me after the first few weeks of getting into this prep. So I just kind of rolled with it and was like, I can do this compliance challenge with you guys.
I'll take your money.
It was Mag's idea because there was a prize on board. I think she had it pretty sewn up before she decided to put it out there. But
it underlines the importance of basics, right? If
Yeah.
you can't execute those basics consistently, it's going to be really, really difficult to do the high level stuff. But if you can get enough sleep and get enough water and eat your veggies and commit to a training program and practice self-care, yeah, you're going to set yourself up with a pretty solid base moving forward.
Yeah. And again, going back to what you were saying earlier, Kat, it was like, I felt like all these habits were just starting to build up and becoming too much of the not ideal things that for me. So it's just kind of an opportunity to just cleanse the palate, get it all out of my system. And now it's kind of like after comp, you know, thoughts of reintegrating those things here and there, but on a more moderate basis, I guess you could say, right?
the chaos in itself becomes a habit. Like scrambling becomes a habit. Not being prepared becomes a habit. Not taking your drink bottle, not getting your water, not adding any veggies, getting Uber Eats last minute at night, like whatever it might be, those are becoming your habits. And habits are incredibly hard to break, you know, and the reason they're hard to break is because they do sneak up on you. Before you know it, you've had Uber Eats 4 out of 7 nights, you know, or you've had a couple drinks on a Friday, a couple drinks on a Saturday, maybe a drink, and all of a sudden it's like you're starting to put away a slab or a case of beer without any real, especially here, occasion to do that. It's not so much that it's a special occasion and the juice is going to be worth the squeeze and I'll deal with the fluid retention and the increased scale weight and the hangover because it's worth it. It's just been like, you know, it's crept up, it's built up over time. So I think that is a really big thing to be mindful of, is like, what are those underlying habits or behaviors or decisions that you're making subconsciously?
Well, we talk a lot about relying on habits as opposed to external motivation, right? But when you're letting those bad habits accumulate, that also undercuts the motivation piece, because you're not seeing progress, you're not seeing positive change. And so it's, well, why put in the effort, right? When you're just kind of half-assing everything. So if you start to pull back on those bad habits and add in the good ones and start seeing that change, yeah, you get a little bit of the benefit of the motivation as well.
I think you start to realize too that depending on your weekends, like, you can undo the work that you do Monday to Friday if your weekends are completely unplanned and unstructured. I think we have this idea that you know, we need more time, but typically what we see, particularly from our Monday to Friday 9 to 5ers, is they have their shit together through the week because you have no choice. You don't have time to scramble and be last minute. So you get prepared, you do your meal prep, take your food, because everything is so regimented that you have no other choice. But then you get to the weekend, your meal preps run out, you don't have work for this big, massive period during the day. So you can preamble down to the shops and you know, maybe grab brunch and catch up with someone for lunch. And it's almost like that free time that you think is going to make things so much easier is actually what's becoming your undoing, right? I think the other thing for timing, which I found super helpful, it's been the end of the football season here. And football season for us usually means most nights either watching whatever game's on, catching up on a game, or watching like the analysis of the games and the kind of upcoming. And so for me, I've found over the last 4 weeks since the season's finished that, like, I'm getting back into Audible much harder than I kind of do during the season. And a lot of the things that I've been reading, I reread Dave Goggins at least once a year. But that kind of like mentality of like, go a little bit further, do a little bit more, take more responsibility. Like, you know, if anything's worth doing, why the fuck aren't you doing it properly or to your best, you know, standard? And you start to implement those things because they are kind of beating around in your head. And, you know, we've kind of had a bit of a joke of even little things like, I'm a big one for putting my dishes in the sink after I'm done with them as like my way of cleaning up. It's like, why don't I just put them in the dishwasher and then it's done? Like, could I do what I'm doing?
Empty dishwasher.
Yeah, could I do what I'm doing a little bit better or a little bit further, or, you know, and it starts to bleed into all these other areas. And I think it's just been the perfect melting pot of sun's coming out, gyms are back open. We've had a little bit of a 4-week run up, more, you know, being active in general. And it's been quite a nice 4 weeks. And I know Mags has got her, you know, weigh in next week and it all comes to a point. But, you know, I think for us, like we said earlier, the goal is not, okay, revert right back to where we were. It's been, okay, now we're charging into like the next 3 weeks. Probably not going to be as like 2 cashews, half a protein shake and a strawberry to get them down to the gram. But I think within, you know, 5 grams of your fats and about 10 of your protein and carbs per day is like, it's not an unrealistic or overly difficult task to meet.
No, especially not when you've had 4 weeks of practice, right? And you're pretty on it and habituated.
Yeah.
I think kind of what got me into the phase I was in prior to committing to this prep was things had been open here for quite a while, but the weather was really nice and there was a lot of things starting to like get up and running. And there was just a lot of things that I could say yes to again. So maybe this can serve as like a little bit of a lesson for you guys going into this in Melbourne. It's like I almost felt like this pressure to say yes to everything. And it's almost like, you know, at holidays, say Christmas, for example, we talk about that idea of scarcity, where it's like, oh my gosh, this food is here and I'm never going to have this food again, so I got to eat it all. I felt kind of a similar thing happen and saw, like, anecdotally too, a lot of other people going through kind of similar struggles where it's like, there's so much to say yes to. I want to say yes to everything because I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to say yes and do this and go out to that and blah, blah, blah. So I almost felt like I was overcommitting myself to things that didn't necessarily align with my goals, which at the time didn't really know what those were either. So making sure you have those clear set goals that you continue to revisit, and just knowing that you don't have to say yes to everything, even though, things are opening. Touch wood, it's not going to go away again. And just, so that's kind of how I'm approaching coming out of this, is like, okay, now I have a little bit more of a centered, view of like where my goals are and what I kind of want to do in order to stay aligned with those, but not to the extent I have been for the past 8 to 18 weeks.
I think that's what I love most about the CrossFit community. And particularly the communities that we do a lot of work with down here, is that you get that ability to socialize in a context that's not always built around the bar or food. And maybe it's built around food and drink, but it's not necessarily like super elaborate or like super calorically dense foods. It might be more like an activity, like a physical activity, or you train. Like I love training with my mates. Like that's kind of, like guys like Rocky and Ryan and Steve, and it's this opportunity to catch up where like you haven't seen each other predominantly for a long period of time, and you can spend an hour to an hour and a half lifting some weights, getting a sweat on, and like having that social interaction as well. So, but I'm also the opposite. I'm like, say yes to everything. I'm gonna catch up with one person. Why don't we catch up with 10? Like,
yeah. And
even if it doesn't have to do with food or alcohol or anything like that, like you're taking away from time that you could be putting into yourself, is what I found happening. Right.
100%. Just maybe a good note to leave it on. Be clear on your goals and
slow down.
Do what makes you happy and what serves you, and don't automatically revert to the yes because the options available, whether that be experiences, food, challenges, anything.
And well, for anyone listening as well, that's like, no, I just prefer the finer things in life. If you're doing them every day, like they're not the finer things anymore. It's just your regular, right? Like it's just become that habit and that routine. And sometimes a little bit of a shake up and a little bit of a kick up the ass is exactly what we need,
have never been so excited to go out for Italian food and have a nice glass of wine. Like it's got a whole new.
It's going to be so much more special than if you've been doing that 3 nights a week for the last 8 to 18 weeks.
Exactly.
Yeah. So congratulations, Mags. Did we ever decide on what the prize was?
We did. You just disagreed with it, but it's too late now.
So we didn't agree on.
We did. Majority rules.
Always ganging up on you. And so what was it? What was the big prize? Was it dinner?
We're putting money into a gift card of the winner's choosing.
All right. And do you have a choice for that, Mags?
Holy, the pressure. No.
Not
what
yet.
would you like it to be, Ben?
No,
that was not the agreement.
No, it's your prize, Max. You choose. But congratulations, great effort. And again, like it's tedious. Like getting to the gram is tedious, and there were multiple days where Mags didn't score any points, and that's, as a competitor, you're like, it's just disheartening. If I'm like 2 grams of fat off, it's like game over on like the first week. So,
well, I said I spent a lot of more time like by myself at home. Yeah, some of that was spent like meticulously
entering and re-entering and dividing your cashews.
This type A part of me kind of coming out and really enjoyed that. But I'm excited to loosen the reins a little bit moving forward in a strategic manner. Got my crew with me. So.
Well, good luck next week.
Thanks.
And we look forward to hearing all about it and celebrating you then as well.
Yes. And then I'll plan my trip out to Melbourne.
Perfect.
Yes, you will.
Perfect.
All right.
All right. Thank you, coaches.
Thank you, guys.